The night my mother changed the locks on the house I grew up in, it was 19 degrees outside, and I was standing on the porch in a hospital scrub top because I'd driven straight there after a double shift without even grabbing my coat. I knocked. I knocked again. I could see the light on in the kitchen, see the shadow of someone moving behind the curtain, and I knew it was her. I called out, "Mom, it's me. It's Claire, open up." And the porch light went off, just like that. Like swatting a fly off the counter. Like I was something she decided to stop noticing. I want to back up, because if I just tell you the ending, you won't understand why it mattered so much, and you won't understand why, 8 months later, I let it all play out the way I did. I was 31 that winter. I'd spent the previous 9 years working as an ICU nurse at a hospital outside Columbus, Ohio, which meant I had spent 9 years being good in a crisis and useless at protecting myself, because those are apparently two different skills and nobody teaches you the second one. I was the kid in the family who could be counted on. That sounds like a compliment. It isn't. In a family like mine, being the reliable one just means you're the one they reach for when something needs to be carried, and they put you down the second their hands are free. My younger sister was the one they actually loved. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it was simply, observably true. The way it's true that water runs downhill. From the time we were little, she was the bright one, the pretty one. The one whose report cards got taped to the fridge while mine went into a drawer. When she wrecked the car at 17, my father drove out at 2 in the morning and handled the whole thing and never mentioned it again. When I got a partial scholarship to nursing school, my mother told me it was a shame I wasn't aiming higher, and then asked if my sister could borrow my old laptop for her classes, which she dropped out of by Thanksgiving. I kept thinking, if I just did enough, they'd see me. So I did enough. They'd see me. So I did enough. I did more than enough. When my dad's heart gave out 4 years ago, I was the one who took the family leave, who slept in the chair next to his hospital bed, who learned how to manage the medications and the insurance appeals and the slow, grinding paperwork of a man dying in stages. My sister came to visit twice. She brought flowers once. The other time she brought her boyfriend, and they left after 20 minutes because he had a thing. After Dad passed, my mother leaned on me even harder, and I let her. Because that's what good daughters do, I thought. I moved back into my childhood home to help her. I paid the property taxes the year her pension got tangled up in some reassessment. I drove her to every appointment. I fixed the furnace, I shoveled the walk, I did the grocery runs in the snow, and she let me do all of it the way you let a contractor do a job. Polite enough to your face, never once mistaking it for love. The thing that broke it open was the house. My grandmother, my dad's mother, had owned a second property, a little lake house up near Hocking Hills. Nothing fancy, a cabin really, but it sat on 2 acres of woods and it had been in the family for decades. When she died, the will was clear. The lake house was to be split between her grandchildren, which meant me and my sister, 50-50. My grandmother had told me more than once that she wanted me to have a place that was mine, somewhere I could go and breathe. She knew. Old women see everything, but the deed and the estate went through my mother as executor, and over the course of that autumn, I started to notice things. Forms I was asked to sign quickly, in the kitchen, with her standing over my shoulder saying it was just routine. A lawyer I'd never met whose card I found on the counter. My sister suddenly chummy with me in a way she hadn't been since we were children, asking how I was doing, telling me I deserved a break, telling me I worked too hard and should think about my own future. I'm not stupid. I'm just slow to believe people I love would lie to me. Those are also 2 different things. I came home one evening in early December and the 3 of them were sitting at the kitchen table. My mother, my sister, and my sister's husband. A man named Brett who sold luxury cars and had the personality of a handshake. There were papers in front of them. They went quiet when I walked in. The particular quiet of people who have been talking about you. My mother slid a document across the table. She said, in the smooth voice she used on customer service representatives, that they'd been thinking, and that it really made the most sense for the lake house to go entirely to my sister and Brett, because they were planning to start a family and needed the space. And because, she said, I was single and had my career and didn't really need a vacation home, did I? And all I had to do was sign away my half. To keep the peace, to be the bigger person. The way I always was, I asked her what I'd be getting in return. She looked at me like I'd said something obscene. She said, Claire, it's family. We don't keep score. We don't keep score. From the woman who had a mental ledger of every dollar I'd ever cost her and not one entry for everything I'd given. I didn't sign. I told her I needed time to read it. My sister's face did something ugly for half a second before she smoothed it back over. Brett leaned back in his chair and said, real casual, that I should think hard about it, because nobody wanted things to get unpleasant, and a girl living alone really ought to keep good relationships with her family. I have replayed that sentence 100 times. The threat net was so soft you could almost pretend it wasn't there. I took the papers up to my old bedroom and I really read them, and that's when I found it. Buried in the legal language was not just a transfer of the lake house. It was a quitclaim that would have signed over my interest in my late grandmother's entire estate, including, I would later learn, a brokerage account she'd held that nobody had mentioned to me at all. That's the part I want you to hold on to, because it comes back. I didn't confront them. I'd love to tell you I stood up and made a speech, but I didn't. I was tired in a way that went down to the bone, and I had a shift in 6 hours, and some animal part of me knew that if I tipped my hand, they'd just find a quieter way to do it. So I made copies of everything on the little printer in my room, and I emailed them to myself, and I went to work. 2 days later, I came home to the changed locks. There was a box on the porch with some of my clothes thrown into it, the lid not even closed, a sweater sleeve hanging out into the snow like something reaching for help. My mother had texted me, and I'll never forget the wording because it was so dignified, so reasonable. She said she thought it would be healthier for everyone if I found my own place, that my negativity around the estate was creating a toxic environment, and that she hoped I'd come around and we could put this behind us as a family. I stood on that porch in my scrubs and I felt the cold go all the way through me, and I thought with a clarity I'd never had before, she will never love me. Not because I haven't earned it, because she was never going to. The love I'd been working overtime for my entire life did not exist and was never going to exist, and the relief of finally knowing that was almost as big as the grief. I picked up the box, I got in my car, and I drove to a motel off the highway, and I cried until I couldn't anymore. And then I stopped crying because crying wasn't going to fix it, and I am very, very good in a crisis. The next morning, I did 3 things. First, I called the lawyer whose card I'd found on the counter, and I learned exactly nothing because he wouldn't talk to me, which told me everything. Then I called a different lawyer, one a coworker recommended, an estate attorney named Frank Osei, who had reading glasses pushed up on his bald head and a way of listening that made you feel like the only case he'd ever had. I laid everything out on his desk, the copies, the texts, the quitclaim, all of it. He read it slowly. Then he took his glasses off and he said, Claire, your grandmother's will is valid and it's specific. Your mother is the executor, which means she has a legal duty to act in the interest of the heirs, both heirs. And what these documents describe her attempting to do is not just unfair. In several places, it may be fraud. I want to be honest about how that felt. It did not feel triumphant. It felt like the floor of my whole life had been a trapdoor the entire time and I was only now seeing the hinges. The second thing I did was open my own bank statement because Frank had asked about my grandmother's brokerage account and I realized I'd never actually checked whether anything had been distributed yet. And that's when I saw it. My grandmother, it turned out, had not trusted my mother either. About a year before she died, without telling anyone in the family, she had moved a substantial portion of her assets out of the estate that would pass through my mother and do a transfer on death account with one beneficiary named directly, me, not split, me. She had left my sister her half of the lake house and a generous cash gift through the will, fair and clean. But the brokerage account, the one nobody had told me about, the one my mother had been so quietly trying to fold into that quitclaim, had already passed to me automatically the moment my grandmother died. It just hadn't been transferred into my name yet because the paperwork had stalled in probate, the same probate my mother was sitting on top of. When the transfer finally cleared, 8 days after I got locked out of my childhood home, the balance that landed in my account was a little over $2 million. I sat in that motel room and I looked at the number and I did not feel rich. I felt seen. For the first time in my life, somebody who knew exactly who my mother was had looked ahead and protected me from her. My grandmother had reached out from beyond her own grave and put her hand on my shoulder and said, "I know what they are, and I've got you." I called Frank back. I told him about the account. There was a silence on the line, and then he laughed, just once. A short surprise sound, and he said, "Well, that changes the conversation. Here's where I have to tell you about the missed calls, because that's the part everyone always asks about. I had blocked nobody. I want to be clear. I just stopped picking up. After I got locked out, I'd gone quiet, gone dark, didn't post anything, didn't respond. For about a week, my family enjoyed their victory in peace, assuming I was off licking my wound somewhere. The reliable one finally put in her place. Then the probate paperwork moved, because Frank made it move, and a notice went out, the kind that gets sent to all interested parties, informing them that the transfer on death account had been distributed to its named beneficiary and was not part of the estate. I found out my family had received that notice because of what happened to my phone. I'd had it on silent during a 12-hour shift. When I came out to my car at 7 in the evening and turned the screen on, it just kept loading. 41 missed calls. Then it buzzed and it was 42. By the time I got back to my apartment, the little one-bedroom I'd just signed a lease on, it was past 70. They came from my mother, my sister's husband, an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years, a cousin, even Brett's mother, a woman I'd met exactly twice, 70-something calls in the span of an afternoon, from people who, 11 days earlier, had thrown my sweaters in a box and turned off the porch light. The voicemails were a masterclass. I saved every one of them. My mother's first message, left before she understood the full picture, was still icy. She said we needed to discuss the estate, and that I'd left her no choice but to involve the lawyers. By the fourth voicemail, her voice had changed entirely. By the seventh, she was crying, calling me her baby girl, saying she didn't know what had gotten into her, that grief over my father had made her crazy, that family was everything and we had to stick together. My sister's messages went from wheedling to furious to wheedling again. Brett left exactly one, and in it he managed to call me a manipulative little snake and also ask if I could lend them some money for a house they were about to lose, in the same breath with no apparent awareness of the contradiction. I didn't call any of them back. I went and got a burrito and I ate it in my new kitchen on a folding chair because I didn't have real furniture yet, and it was the best meal of my entire life. What I did instead of calling them back was let Frank do his work. And I want to tell you the part that the angry comments always want, the part where it lands on them, because it did land, and I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing but sorrow watching it. It came out, in the course of all this, that my mother as executor had not only tried to defraud me, she had also been quietly borrowing against the estate using my grandmother's assets to cover her own debts that turned out to be substantial. Because Brett, it transpired, had talked her into investing in one of his opportunities the year before, and it had gone exactly as well as anything Brett touched. When the court appointed an independent examiner to review her conduct as executor, the whole thing came apart. My mother was removed as executor. The court ordered an accounting, and the missing money had to be repaid, which meant the house I grew up in, her house now, had to be sold to cover it. She moved into a senior apartment complex on the other side of town. The last I heard, she had taken a part-time job at the front desk of a dental office, answering phones. The woman who once told me we don't keep score now keeping appointment schedules for strangers. My sister and Brett did lose their house, the one Brett had begged me to bail out. Though not because of anything I did, they lost it because they'd never been able to afford it in the first place. And the lake house they'd schemed so hard to steal my half of turned out to come with my half, which I had no intention of selling to them, and which I quietly bought out from them instead, for a fair price. on the open market through Frank so that today it is entirely mine. They needed the cash. I had the cash. There's a kind of justice that doesn't require any cruelty at all. It just requires you to finally stop bleeding for people who were never going to bleed for you. Brett left a final voicemail after that sale closed. I won't repeat it. Let's just say he never sold me on his charm. People in my life have asked me whether I gave any of them money in the end. Whether I softened. Whether the holidays brought reconciliation. I know that's what we're supposed to do. The bigger person, the forgiving daughter, the one who rises above. I thought about it a lot, honestly. I'm not a cruel person, and I didn't enjoy my mother working a front desk at 63. But here's what I came to, and I'll tell you, because maybe somebody listening needs to hear it the way I needed to hear it. Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. I can forgive my mother in my own heart, can release the years of wanting something from her that she didn't have to give, and I have mostly on my better days. But forgiving someone does not mean handing them the keys again. It does not mean funding the next scheme, or pretending the box on the porch never happened, or teaching my own future kids that this is what family does, and you just absorb it. My grandmother knew that. She forgave my mother her whole life, I'm sure, in the way mothers forgive children. And then she quietly, deliberately made sure that the one grandchild who'd never been protected would finally be protected, and she did it without a single confrontation, without a speech, just a signature on a form, a year before she died. That's the kind of woman I want to be, not the kind who burns it all down, the kind who builds a door, walks through it, and decides who gets a key. I used some of the money to pay off my student loans and to put a real down payment on a small house of my own, 10 minutes from the hospital. I cut my hours back just a little for the first time in 9 years. I planted a garden at the lake house, my lake house, where my grandmother used to take me when I was small, and tell me I was worth more than they would ever admit. I go up there on my days off, and I sit on the dock and I breathe, exactly like she wanted me to. I still work in the ICU. I still run toward the crisis when the alarms go off. But I learned the second skill, finally, the one nobody teaches you. I learned how to protect myself, and it turns out you don't have to choose between being the kind of person who shows up for others and the kind who refuses to be thrown away. You can be both. I'm both. The locks they changed on me that night were the best thing that ever happened to me, though it took me a long time and $2 million and a grandmother who saw the whole thing coming to understand it. They didn't lock me out of a family. They locked me out of a cage I'd been polishing my entire life and calling home. If you've ever been the reliable one, the one they reach for and then set down, the one waiting for love that has to be earned and never quite arrives, I want you to hear me. You are not too much, and you were never the problem. Sometimes the people who should have held you are the ones who teach you, by their absence, exactly how strong your own two hands really are. Have you ever had to walk away from family to finally save yourself? Tell me about it below, and if any part of my story found you tonight, stay a while and subscribe, because there are more of us out here than you think, and none of us are alone. The night the porch light went off, I thought my mother had taken something from me. It took me months to understand she had actually handed me the one thing she could never give on purpose, the proof that I was strong enough to stand without her. Everything that happened after that flowed from choices, not luck. My mother chose to borrow against an estate that wasn't hers, and the court found it. My sister and Brett chose to gamble on money they didn't have, and the house went under. None of it was punishment falling from the sky. It was simply what happens when people build a life on taking, and the people they took from finally stop refilling the well. I think a lot about why my grandmother saw it coming when I couldn't. She wasn't smarter than me in any way you could measure. What she had was the willingness to look at the people she loved and see them clearly, even when it hurt, and then act on what she saw instead of what she wished were true. That's the part I had been missing my whole life. I kept solving the wrong problem. I thought if I worked harder, gave more, carried more, the love would finally arrive. But you can't earn your way into a heart that decided long ago you weren't worth the entry. Seeing that plainly, without flinching, was the hardest piece of growing up I ever did, and it didn't come from a book. It came from standing on a porch in 19-degree cold and finally letting myself believe what was in front of me. There's a difference between being good and being a doormat, and for 31 years I couldn't tell them apart. I know now that doing the right thing never meant letting Brett threaten me in my own kitchen or signing whatever my mother slid across the table to keep a peace that only ever cost me. Real decency has a spine. It shows up for people, yes, but it also refuses to be erased. I didn't burn anything down. I bought the lake house at a fair price, paid off my loans, planted a garden. I let consequences do their own quiet work and I kept my hands clean. That was a choice too. And the strength, the thing that got me through the motel nights and the 70 missed calls and the voicemail where my mother cried and called me her baby girl 11 days after the box on the porch, that wasn't something I was born with. It was something they accidentally built in me every time they set me down and walked away. If you're the reliable one, the one always reaching for love that keeps moving out of reach, hear me. Look honestly at who people actually are. Stay kind, but guard the door. And keep getting back up, because the muscle you build doing that is the one nobody can ever lock you out of.